So we've identified our stakeholders, we've identified ways that we can go about consulting them and feeding information back. Now we're ready to start thinking about developing some plans. So, as I mentioned earlier, operational plans are derived from our strategic and our tactical plans. They're our responsibilities as first level managers. So, our managers, who are generally middle management, will share with us their plans, their commitments that they've made to senior management. So they'll say, "Hey Tony, this is these are my goals. These are our divisions or our branches goals over the next 6 to 12 months. Um, this chunk here is your responsibility. Let's talk about what you can do to drive those." So then that's my responsibility to take that chunk that aligns with my scope of responsibility and then start to develop some plans on how I'm going to achieve those goals on behalf of our team. And our team, I'm referring to my managers being part of my managers team. So I take those, they cascade down to me. I take my scope of responsibility in terms of my operational team and start thinking about how I'm going to participate in delivering those and contributing to the broader, bigger team's goal achievement. So at this point, I know what I need to do. I sit down and identify with my key stakeholders, and I need to start thinking about how I'm going to put that together because it's imperative that my scope of responsibility, I I want to succeed in the goals that I'm encompassed with. My manager has come to me and said, "Tony, it's your responsibility and your team's responsibility to deliver on these." I want to give a commitment that yes, I want to deliver on those. I will deliver on those because if I don't deliver on those, my manager's not going to deliver on their goal. If my manager doesn't deliver on their goals, then their managers aren't going to deliver on their goals, and the organization's not going to deliver on its overall strategic plan. So it's imperative that I have success. So if I want to increase my success, go back to my initial comments at the start of this tutorial. If I want to increase the success of achieving those goals, it would be um, it would be a very good thing if I sit down and develop some good operational plans. So I sit there and I go, all right, time for me to start putting some plans together to set a roadmap on how I'm going to achieve these goals that I have agreed with that I'm going to achieve with my manager. So permeating through all this, of course, is what I've just said before in terms of consultation, making sure that I align them with our key success factors and our KRAs, our KRAs, I should say, making sure that they're in line with our strategic initiatives, our values, and any other organizational frameworks such as that. What I want to do to develop an operational goal, the steps that I want to take is I want to make sure that I list down any specific goals or objectives that need to be achieved. So I break that down. This is goal number one. This is goal number two. This is goal number three, goal number four. The big goals that need to be delivered to to um, to drive the broader plans. I then break down each of those goals into more specific activities. So if the goal is about um, implementing some new IT infrastructure, one of the activities might be around installing the new IT, but then I might have activities also in terms of boxing up and putting away the old stuff, or it might be about selling the old stuff or sending it off to some type of third party to get rid of it. And and also as other activities might be about testing it once it's implemented, and then finally do a handover report. So there might be a number of key activities that need to be done to deliver on that specific goal. And then each of those activities can be broken down into quite specific tasks so that we get this kind of branching down from one goal. You get a range of activities. From those activities, you'll get a range of tasks. A bit like uh, an organizational chart where we sort of start off with one or two little nodes at the top, and then they break out into more nodes as we progress down. And the planning activity, the first part is really just making sure that we can identify the goals or objectives. We can identify the activities to drive each of those goals and objectives, and then we can break those down into tasks. And as we're breaking them down into tasks, we can start thinking about resources we're going to require to deliver on those tasks. So we can think about resources in terms of, do we have the people, or particularly, if we want to be a bit more precise, do we have the skill set required to do that? So that could mean about sourcing people, or it might mean things such as training and development. We also start thinking about in terms of physical resources, tools and equipment that we might need, or financial resources such as the money required to be able to do that. We identify how long each of those tasks also are going to take. And as we're doing that, we also think about the quality standards of those tasks. Are there KPIs associated with that, or benchmark performance standards that need to be met? And as part of that, we're also thinking about who is going to do those tasks, and that sort of weaves into that resource around human resources I was talking about earlier. So at this stage, we've broken down the goals, we've broken down the activities, we've broken down the tasks, we're thinking about the resources, we're thinking about how long it's going to take, we're thinking about the standard or the quality of each of those tasks that need to be done. We're thinking about who is going to be responsible for those tasks. We're then thinking about delivery deadlines. So we're starting to think about, by when must these tasks be completed? And now we start to step back a little bit and start thinking about things such as, how will we know if these things are being done? And that's where we start to now think about monitoring and reporting on it. So if we're saying that we're doing these activities, we're saying that we're doing these tasks, we're saying we're going to do them to these quality standards by these dates and so forth. How are we going to keep track of that so that we know if we're on track, or if we go off track and we need to take corrective action? So we start to weave that into our planning process. So that might mean regular review meetings. It might mean collating information and data. Starts to feed into that type of thinking. And we're going to come back to some of these ideas, mind you. And then we also start to think about risk factors. What are things that can go wrong? How seriously do we take these things, potential things going wrong? What are their consequences if it does happen? How will that have an impact on our overall goal and objective? And we start to develop contingencies. And in some cases, depending on the size and the nature of what we're doing, that could also even include a risk management plan to run alongside our operational plan. And then finally, once we've gone through all this, it's about getting approval. So who needs to see this? Who needs to sign it off before we can start putting it in? And then from there, we start to feed it back out, informing those key stakeholders. Because as I said earlier, we're consulting through each of these steps, and then we're feeding back as we're getting these things done. So overall, that's the operational plan development steps or framework. And now we're going to break that down a little bit further. And the other thing to consider when developing plans is making sure that we write good plans, good, robust plans that are fit for purpose. And one of the tools that we can use when developing plans and breaking them down is the SMART acronym. Now, you may have heard of this before. If you haven't, SMART is an acronym that stands for specific, measurable, achievable, or sometimes attainable, relevant, and time frame. The SMART acronym just ensures that when we're putting together our plans and we're articulating what it is that we're doing to get from point A to point B, that we're constructing them in the way that makes them as usable as possible. So I just want to spend a little bit of time just breaking down how to use this tool. So when we're writing our plans, we set our goals, and then we're going to break down our activities and our tasks or actions. We want to make sure that we're doing that in a way that makes that document usable to everybody who's going to interact with it. So we want to make sure that when we're breaking down our steps, particularly our actions, that we're being specific. We're being specific, sufficiently specific that anybody besides us can pick up that document and be on the same page as us in terms of what needs to be done and where it's going to happen, who's going to do it, when it's going to happen, and so forth. It's really about making sure that the statements that we write within there, and a plan really is a collection of statements, a collection of small goals which are or goal statements which are going to create a pathway from point A to point B. So when we're breaking that down, we're doing that in such a way that anybody else can pick up that document and be on the same page as us, have the same understanding of what that means as we do. And to be able to do that, it needs to be quite specific. It needs to be objective in its language. That is, it doesn't. You don't want to be using subjective language such as "do a good job." You want to be quite objective in a sense that it's clear and specific. It has measurable, and I'll get to that shortly, but it has measurable terminology and words in there so that it makes it objective. So when we're writing something specific, we want to say uh, this task needs to be done to this particular standard. And if we can set out a clear, quantifiable standard, that is something that is measurable in terms of numbers, which is ideal, then it rolls into the next part of the acronym, which is the measurable, the M for the measurable. So instead of saying something like, oh, I mean, one of the tasks is make sure the staff are happy, which is an admirable goal to achieve, but it's a highly subjective statement because happiness can be manifested differently for different people. So what we want to do is we want to be able to make it measurable and specific enough that everybody understands what that means. So we need to break it down and say, what does happiness mean? What does it actually look like? Well, happiness might look like, in the context, it might look like whether it's people smiling, or whether it's reduced absenteeism, or whether it's some type of approval rating or score, something like a survey to say, are you satisfied with the change? And then we're going to set a target that 80% of staff need to say yes. So we really want to be thinking about how we can make our plans specific and measurable that anybody can pick it up, understand what it is that we're going to do, but also that it's measurable enough that we can tell when we have achieved it or not. So by having that quantifiable metric on it, specifically in terms of numbers wherever possible, it makes it easier for us to, when we do go to review it and monitor our performance, to tell whether we have achieved it or not. It needs to be attainable. With any goals that we set, ideally, the goal is set in such a way that it challenges us to put in the effort. And we generally, as people, we generally enjoy things that challenge us. We don't like to be bored with things that are not going to challenge us. So having something that we agree on its purpose and we see the merit or value of, and it also challenges us to achieve it, is something that we enjoy. We enjoy to be challenged, and we enjoy being able to push ourselves to some degree to do that. And especially if it develops us and we grow as part of that. That's the ideal for many of us. We don't want it though to be so difficult that it becomes demotivational. So the goal needs to be, the goals within the plan need to be such that they are going to challenge us, but that they are very obtainable, so that we don't think that, oh well, that's shooting for the stars is just too far. We need to see something realistically, and we want our plans to be inspirational and really be a challenge for us, but not such a challenge that it becomes too much of a gap between what we perceive is possible and what we see that the goals or plan is asking us to do. And that's the A. the R stands for relevant, to make sure that it actually ties into what it is that we're doing. So, in the context of what we've been talking about, our goals and our plans need to cascade with the business goals and plans, such as strategic goals and plans, the tactical goals and plans, or the branches or the divisions or our managers, but it needs to cascade from those so that it's aligned with what the business is doing. So that means aligned with those plans that I just mentioned, but also aligned with things such as KRAs or CSFs that we talked about earlier, so key result areas and critical success factors. If our business has those in place, that our plans are also aligned with those. And then finally, it needs to have some type of time frame measurement to it. We need to have a deadline to the task, the action or the task or the goal or the um, activity, to know when what we're striving towards, but also to know when we have achieved it or not. So the SMART acronym is a really great tool when we're actually sitting down and we're starting to draft our plans, to start thinking about how we're going to phrase those statements, what we're actually going to say as the content of our plan, and making sure that it's a robust statement by calibrating back to the SMART acronym. And it's a really useful tool. And there are other variations, so smarter uh, goals and plans and so forth. But I want to just stick to the SMART one for the purpose of this unit and this discussion. So here's a very simple one. So this is probably at the most rudimentary end of a plan. This is where it's a fairly simple, straightforward goal that you want to achieve. You don't want to make it too complex at this stage, and we're really just going to set this down. So this is really just looking at those first few steps in the previous slide in terms of planning, where we're going to identify the goal, we're going to identify the activities, the actions, who's going to do what, and when it's going to be done, and then have some type of performance measure or review to it. So here's an example. The goal is all staff to be competent in procedure by 1st of December. And we can probably just even articulate that a little bit more specific when we set it into our plan, to say something like staff are competent in procedure ABC and staff records indicate competency. That is quite a specific statement there. We'll know we've got the procedure, we're very clear about that. When we say all staff, we're talking about 100%. So we can measure that. Then we need to break down 3 key activities to achieve that goal. We need to be able to, first of all, finalize the procedures. Then we need to undertake a competency assessment on all staff to determine if there's a gap. And then we need to provide training where the gap exists. And there are 3 key activities. And it may be that three different people are responsible for those activities, so we need to break those down. Or it may be that we see that as some sequential part of the plan. But then we can break down each of those activities into actions or tasks. And for the first one, so the first activity is finalize procedures. We're going to research, then we're going to consult, we're going to then develop and design the procedure, and then we're going to make sure that we get it signed off. And then by that, we can set deadlines to that, and we can now start to see that there's a roadmap to get us towards the end, and we can do that for all of it and so forth. And then you can put in you can add KPIs to that. You can put review strategies. As our goals become a lot more complex, then we need to start adding all the resource elements that I talked about earlier, and risk assessment elements and so forth. But for a simple simple goal that you're going to achieve, and you just want to get the team involved together, you may break down a simple operational, or sometimes these are called action plans because they're highly action driven. But this is pretty much your rudimentary one. As we start to get more complex goals or endpoints that we want to get to, we can start becoming a little bit more complex in the way that we do our planning. And here too is a really good opportunity to start bringing in some project management methodologies, because project management really has got a big focus on the planning perspective of it, because the idea of a project is something that's a one-of, that we don't necessarily have as business as usual ongoing. So because it's new, there's a significant focus on planning. We can really start to look at some of those tools. And one of the tools that I like to introduce here is the work breakdown structure. The work breakdown structure as a project tool uses the whole um, organizational chart, or the tree branch and roots analogy to unpack a goal, to determine what the key activities and the tasks are. So, and the language that we use in project management a little bit different, but those key ideas. So, if let's say we were building a web application that has a number of stakeholders involved, we really want to be quite methodical in how we go about breaking down what needs to be done. So here we've identified 7 key activities. We're going to gather the requirements, do the design, do the creation, do the testing, do the hardware, get the customer to accept it, and then do the wrap up. And you can see each of those then gets unpacked even further. So for the requirement gathering, we're going to do the RFP response. We're going to identify hardware requirements. We're going to identify network requirements, and then we're going to identify software requirements. And then that's going to go into the design. So as we start to unpack this, it really gets us to think about things such as timing, such as who's responsible, such as resources required, and risks and so forth. So I just wanted to break down these nodes a little bit more. So each of those nodes within there, so now I'm switching from web application to house project, same type of thing. The project at the top is, or the end goal is to build a house, and 2 of the key activities are in the that reddish color node. One is the skeleton, the other is the interior fittings, and we can then break those down. In this case, we're using the language of main work packages. And in here, you can see that we're starting to build costs as resources, for example, and we're starting to build timelines and people who are liable for the responsibility. So for the skeleton in building a house, for example, one of those main work packages might be about the trusses. The other main work package might be about roofing. And please excuse me if I don't know what I'm talking about, because I don't, in terms of building a house. But let's just say, for the sake of this exercise, it's truss. Let's say it's trusses, and the other one's roofing. You might have different people responsible for that, and the time frames for each of those might be concurrent, or they might be sequential, where we need one to be a precedent to the other one. And the resources might be different for each of those in terms of not only money, but also people, skill set, supplies, and so forth. So using this type of a breakdown tool can be really helpful. And just as this diagram illustrates, it's great. You can do this in a number of ways with whether it's on a whiteboard, doing nodes, or whether it's post-it notes such as this diagram, or any other. There's a whole heap of online tools as well, digital tools available for this. But what it does is it's great to get the team involved and say, okay, this is the goal that we need to achieve. What are the big things that we need to do? What are the activities, the big cluster of things that we need to do? Okay, we need to consult with the stakeholders. We need to then put together a draft. We need to get that signed off. We might need to go out and get some preliminary costings and so forth. And you start putting all these onto post-it notes or whatever your tool is, and then you start to shape them together. And you might determine your cluster of activities. And so if it's post-it notes, you're moving these around all the time. So you're getting a skeleton of what needs to be done. And then once you've identified what needs to be done, then you can start adding cost to it. Okay, how much is this going to cost? What resources do we have the people for this? What timing does this happen? When does it start? When does it need to finish? Does it need to finish before this one? Or does it need to start before this other one? And you can even start looking at things such as, what are things that can go wrong, risks? Do we have to build that into our plan, or do we have to have a separate risk management plan? So as we're starting to unpack the goal, and it might be that we're given the responsibility of upgrading our software system in our organization, and we're quite a large organization, that can be really quite significant. And we want to get our team together because there's quite a body of knowledge there and experience, and these are the people on the front line, so they're best positioned to inform the challenges and what needs to be done. And we can shape and give direction and leadership around that. but really start to construct it. We do a draft. We then go away, we consult further, and it might be we need to consult with specialists, we might need to consult with our managers to gain some preliminary approvals. We may need to go out to the market and get a feel for how much things are going to cost or whether they're available or what we can outsource. And then we come back and we do a second draft of our plan. We might need to go back out again and then we do our third draft and then we might present that for sign off. So the process can be quite back and forth. It can be quite messy in some cases or prolonged, but it's critical to the success of the final project or the final outcome. If we can plan properly, we're foreseeing as many of the obstacles and challenges as possible so that we can prepare for those beforehand. The less time we spend on planning, the more the greater the risk of not foreseeing key tasks or key things, and that's going to have an impact on whether we can get things done on time, whether we can get to the quality standard, whether we're going to be able to get it done within budget, and so forth and so forth. So I just wanted to introduce that methodology because even if you don't use a breakdown structure, the principles of doing that, being able to identify, consult, really unpack what needs to be done, and then start to draft your plan from that.